My name is Sophia Watson, and I'm 29 years old. I was the sister who wasn't good enough to be invited to her own sister's wedding. You'll make things awkward, my mother said. Alison wanted her perfect day, and apparently, I was the imperfection they needed to edit out. Then came the accident that changed everything. 3 weeks before the wedding, a single phone call rewrote our family's entire story. They had no idea what I would become to them. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button as I share how life taught my family the true meaning of sisterhood. Growing up, Alison and I were inseparable despite being 3 years apart. I still remember teaching her how to ride a bike in our driveway in suburban Massachusetts, holding the back of her seat and promising I wouldn't let go until she was ready. She'd follow me around our house like a shadow, wanting to do everything her big sister did. We shared a bedroom until I was 12, staying up late whispering secrets and dreams under blanket forts illuminated by flashlights. That closeness began to fracture when I entered high school. I discovered photography, art, and a sense of individuality that didn't quite fit our family mold. While Alison excelled at things my parents valued, academics, student council, community service that looked good on college applications, I was drawn to creative pursuits they considered hobbies rather than legitimate career paths. Sophia, why can't you apply yourself like your sister, became my mother Diana's mantra. Every A- on my report card was scrutinized, while Alison's perfect grades were celebrated with dinners out. When I dyed a purple streak in my hair at 16, my mother didn't speak to me for 3 days. When I announced my intention to study photography in college rather than business or pre-law, my mother cried as though I'd announced terminal illness. I just don't understand why you always have to be different, she said, making different sound like the worst possible thing a daughter could be. My father Robert was less obvious about his favoritism, but it was there in subtler ways. He'd attend all of Alison's debate competitions, but had convenient work conflicts during my photography exhibitions. When I'd come home excited about having a photograph selected for a student showcase, he'd offer a distracted, "That's nice, honey," without looking up from his newspaper. The true divide wasn't just about our interests or achievements. It was about conformity. Alison understood the unwritten rules of our family: maintain appearances, don't rock the boat, achieve in ways that impress the neighbors. I could never quite grasp why those things mattered so much. By the time I left for college at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, the distance between us wasn't just geographical. Alison was the golden child, following the prescribed path to success. She chose a sensible business major at our father's alma mater, joined the right sorority, and maintained the perfect GPA. I was in Manhattan with blue hair at one point, working 3 jobs to afford camera equipment, and spending weekends photographing protests and underground music scenes. After graduation, I stayed in New York, slowly building my photography career. I started with wedding photography to pay bills, but eventually found my niche in documentary-style portrait work. My portfolio grew with images of interesting faces and untold stories. I had an exhibition at a small gallery in Brooklyn. None of my family attended. Meanwhile, Alison graduated with honors, secured a job at a prestigious marketing firm, and moved into a beautiful apartment in Boston. She met James during a charity gala, the son of one of my father's golf buddies, working in finance with a family name that opened doors. When they started dating, my mother couldn't have been more delighted. "He comes from such a good family," she'd gush during our increasingly rare phone calls. The subtext was clear: unlike the artists, musicians, and activists I surrounded myself with, the few times I visited home for holidays became exercises in invisibility. Conversations revolved around Alison's promotions, James' family connections, and the couple's vacation plans. My own achievements, a feature in an arts magazine, a grant for a photography project documenting immigrant communities, were acknowledged with polite disinterest. "That's interesting, dear," my mother would say before quickly changing the subject to Allison's latest accomplishment. "I built my own support system. My best friend Megan, a writer I met at a gallery opening, became the sister I could talk to without judgment. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister ironically, was the one family member who seemed to value my different path. She'd visit me in New York, marveling at the life I'd built. You remind me of myself at your age," she told me once over coffee in my small Brooklyn apartment. Before I gave in to what everyone else wanted. She had abandoned her own artistic pursuits to marry young and follow a more conventional path. I sometimes wondered if my mother's disdain for my choices stemmed from seeing the road not taken through her own sister. By the time I turned 29, my communication with my family had dwindled to obligatory birthday calls and tense holiday visits every other year. I heard most family news secondhand through Aunt Patricia. When she called to tell me James had proposed to Allison with a family heirloom diamond in front of both sets of parents at Christmas dinner, I felt a complicated mix of happiness for my sister and sadness at being so peripheral to her life. "Your mother's already talking about the wedding planning," Aunt Patricia said. "She's in her element." I laughed without much humor. "I'm sure she is." I sent Allison a congratulatory text, receiving a brief thanks. "So excited," in response. I tried not to read into the exclamation points what wasn't there: warmth, an invitation to share in her joy, any acknowledgement of our once close bond. I told myself it didn't matter. I had built a fulfilling life in New York. My photography business was finally stable enough that I didn't need to take wedding gigs unless I wanted to. I had friends who got me a cozy apartment in Williamsburg and the freedom to create on my own terms. If my family couldn't see the value in that, it was their loss. But some nights, scrolling through social media and seeing pictures of Allison and James with my parents at engagement parties and family gatherings I hadn't been invited to, the rejection still stung. There was an Allison-shaped hole in my life that all the artistic fulfillment in the world couldn't quite fill. Little did I know then that fate was about to redraw all the boundaries we'd established, forcing us to confront the fragile foundations our family was built upon. The official engagement announcement came via a glossy photo card in the mail, Allison and James looking polished and perfect against a sunset backdrop, the diamond catching the light just so. Save the date, it proclaimed in elegant script, announcing a June wedding at a historic estate in the Berkshires. I propped it on my refrigerator next to takeout menus and art exhibition flyers, this artifact from a parallel family universe. The early wedding planning calls with my mother were stilted exercises in surface pleasantries. "The venue has the most stunning gardens for photos," she'd say, though she'd never expressed interest in my professional opinion on photography before. "The Henderson's daughter had her reception there last year." I'd make appropriate noises of interest, while feeling increasingly like an outsider looking in. Allison herself rarely called. When she did, conversation revolved around wedding details with no mention of whether I'd be in the bridal party, something that once would have been assumed between sisters. As weeks passed, the calls from my mother took on a peculiar tone, filled with vague references to keeping things simple and making sure everything goes smoothly. Then came the call that made everything crystal clear. "Sophia," my mother began one evening in early March, her voice carrying that formal quality it took on when she was working up to something unpleasant. "I wanted to talk to you about Allison's wedding." I braced myself, expecting to hear I wasn't going to be a bridesmaid after all. What came instead was worse than I'd imagined. "Your father and I have been discussing this with Allison and James, and we think, well, we feel it might be best if you don't attend the wedding." The silence that followed stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Sophia, Did you hear me? I heard you, I managed finally. You don't want me at my own sister's wedding. It's not that we don't want you there, she said, her voice taking on the reasonable tone that always preceded her most unreasonable statements. It's just that Allison wants her day to be perfect. You know how these society weddings are. The Hamiltons will be there, and the Prestons, and James' family is very traditional. And I'm not perfect enough. Is that it? You're too unpredictable, Sophia, she said with a sigh. The blue hair at Christmas. That was 3 years ago. The argument with Uncle Charles at Thanksgiving about politics. He was being racist. And frankly, dear, we're concerned you'll dress inappropriately. Those tattoos, and you know how you like to stand out. Each accusation landed like a slap. I had a small constellation tattoo on my wrist, and had shown up to exactly one family function with temporarily colored hair years ago. As for speaking up against racist comments, apparently that was worse than making them. So because I'm not a carbon copy of Allison, I'm not invited to her wedding. Does she know about this conversation? Of course she does. It was partly her idea. That hurt more than anything else, knowing my sister had participated in this exclusion. You'd make things awkward, Sophia. You always do. After the call, I sat in my darkened apartment, phone in hand, trying to process what had just happened. When the initial shock subsided, I did what once would have been natural. I called Allison directly. I just talked to Mom, I said when she answered. Her sigh was barely audible. I figured she'd call you today. So it's true. You don't want me at your wedding. It's not that I don't want you there, she said, echoing our mother's words so precisely it was clear they'd rehearsed this. It's just complicated. James' family is very image conscious, and this wedding is important for Dad's business connections too. And I'm bad for the image. You always have to make everything about you, she said, voice hardening. You show up with your camera and your artistic opinions, and everyone has to adjust around Sophia being Sophia. When have I ever done that at a family event? You know what I mean. You just stand out. And for once, I'd like the attention on me without worrying what statement my sister is going to make. The conversation ended with nothing resolved. I was still uninvited. My sister still believed I would somehow ruin her day by my mere presence. And I was left wondering how the little girl, who once followed me everywhere, now saw me as someone to be hidden away from her new life. The next day, I called Aunt Patricia to see if she'd heard about the situation. Oh, Sophia, she sighed. Your mother called me last night to make sure I wouldn't mention anything to you about the wedding. So everyone knows I'm being excluded. She's telling people you're too busy with work in New York to attend, Aunt Patricia said. I'm so sorry, dear. The family gossip mill at work. A perfect fiction to maintain appearances, while hiding the messier truth that the black sheep daughter wasn't welcome at the golden child's wedding. I threw myself into work in the weeks that followed, booking back-to-back photo sessions and a small exhibition that kept me too busy to dwell on the rejection. When friends asked about my sister's upcoming wedding, I became adept at vague responses about scheduling conflicts. The only person who knew the full truth was Megan, who offered to stage an elaborate alternative event the same weekend. We'll have our own party, she insisted, over wine in my apartment. Better music, better food, and zero judgmental relatives. I appreciated the gesture, but couldn't muster enthusiasm for a consolation celebration. Despite years of distant relationship, despite the consistent favoritism and dismissal of my life choices, being explicitly uninvited to Allison's wedding cut deeper than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just about missing one day. It was the unmistakable message that I didn't belong in their family narrative. As the June wedding date approached, I made peace with the situation as best I could. I sent a modest gift from Alison's registry, with a simple card wishing her happiness. I declined Megan's alternative party plans in favor of accepting a photography assignment in Chicago that weekend, something to keep me thoroughly occupied and far from New York, where the emptiness of not being at my sister's wedding might feel too acute. I told myself it was their loss. I told myself I was better off without that judgment and conditional acceptance. I almost convinced myself it was true. Then, 3 weeks before the meticulously planned wedding, my phone rang at 2:37 a.m. It was my father, and everything changed. The late-night call jolted me from sleep, my father's voice uncharacteristically shaky on the other end. "Sophia, there's been an accident. Alison, she's in the hospital." The fog of sleep vanished instantly. What happened? Is she okay? Her car went off the road on the way back from her bachelorette party. She's in surgery right now. His voice cracked. It's bad, Sophia. It's really bad. Without hesitation, I said, I'll be on the first flight out. While booking the earliest morning flight to Boston, I realized the irony wasn't lost on me, rushing to be with a sister who hadn't wanted me at her wedding. But such calculations seemed petty in the face of crisis. Whatever lay between us, she was still my sister. I landed at Logan Airport by 9 a.m. and took a taxi straight to Massachusetts General Hospital, my hastily packed overnight bag slung over my shoulder. The antiseptic hospital smell hit me as soon as I walked through the sliding doors, a scent that triggered memories of my grandfather's final days years earlier. I found my parents in the surgical waiting room, mother clutching her designer handbag like a life preserver, father pacing in the same navy blazer he wore to every significant family event, as if dressing formally might somehow influence outcomes. James sat apart from them, staring at his phone, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled. My mother looked up as I approached, surprise and something like annoyance flashing across her face. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" Not "thank you for coming," or "I'm glad you're here." The question stung, but I refused to let it show. "Dad called me. I came as soon as I could." "How is she?" "She's still in surgery," my father answered, stepping forward to give me a brief, awkward hug. "They're working on her spine." "Her spine." The word sent a chill through me. "The car rolled down an embankment," he explained, voice clinical as if emotional distance might make the facts less terrifying. "She was thrown partially out of the vehicle. There's trauma to her spinal cord, among other injuries." My mother remained seated, her posture rigid. "You didn't need to come all this way. There's nothing any of us can do but wait." "I needed to be here," I replied simply, taking a seat across from her. James nodded in my direction, but didn't speak, his attention returning to his phone. The hours crawled by with minimal updates. Around noon, a surgeon in blue scrubs finally appeared, his face bearing the weary expression of someone who had been making life-altering decisions for hours. "Watson family?" he asked, and we all stood. "Alison is out of surgery. We've stabilized her, but I need to be clear about the extent of her injuries." What followed was a clinical assessment that boiled down to devastating news. Alison had suffered a spinal cord injury that might result in partial or complete paralysis from the waist down. There was also internal bleeding they'd managed to control, a collapsed lung, and multiple fractures. She was being moved to intensive care, where she'd remain sedated for at least 24 hours. "Will she walk again?" My mother's question cut through the medical terminology. "It's too early to say with certainty," the surgeon replied carefully. "The next few days will tell us more about the extent of the spinal cord damage." I watched my mother's carefully composed facade crumble, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. My father placed an arm around her shoulders, his own face ashen. James stood slightly apart, his expression a complex mixture of shock and something that looked disturbingly like calculation. "When can we see her?" I asked. "Once she's settled in ICU, you can visit briefly, 2 at a time," the surgeon said. "I should warn you, there's significant facial bruising and she's intubated." After the surgeon left, the wedding that had been the center of family attention for months was suddenly an afterthought. My father made a quiet call to postpone everything indefinitely. My mother sat in stunned silence, occasionally murmuring about all the plans, as if the disruption to the wedding rather than Allison's condition was the true tragedy. When we were finally allowed to see Allison in pairs, my parents went first. I sat beside James in uncomfortable silence until he finally spoke. "This is going to change everything," he said, more to himself than to me. "She's still Allison," I replied, a strange defensiveness rising in me. He glanced at me, then away. "Yeah, but..." He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. I could read it in his body language, in his inability to look at me directly. He was already calculating what a fiancé with potential paralysis meant for his future. When my turn came to see Allison, I wasn't prepared for the reality despite the doctor's warnings. My vibrant, perfect sister was unrecognizable beneath the bruising, tubes, and equipment monitoring her vital signs. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was partially shaved where they'd treated a scalp laceration. A ventilator breathed for her with mechanical precision. I approached her bedside cautiously, mindful of the 4 lines and monitoring equipment. Despite our complicated relationship, seeing her so broken shattered something in me. I gently took her hand, careful not to disturb the 4. "Hey, Allie," I whispered, using the childhood nickname I hadn't spoken in years. "It's Sophia. I'm here." Of course, there was no response, just the steady beeping of monitors and the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator. I stayed until a nurse gently suggested I get some rest, promising to call if there was any change. In the waiting room, my mother's initial shock had hardened into something else, a brittle anger that seemed to focus on me as a convenient target. "I suppose you'll be heading back to New York soon," she said as I gathered my bag. "No, I'm staying," I replied. "I've already called work and arranged for time off." "There's really no need," she insisted. "We can manage." I met her gaze directly. "I'm staying, Mom. Allison needs all of us right now." "Now you care about what Allison needs." The accusation was barely veiled. "I have always cared," I said quietly. "Even when you both decided I wasn't wanted." My father interrupted before the conversation could escalate. "Diana, please. Let's not do this now." To me, he added, "You can stay at the house if you want, Sophia. Your old room is still there." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of hospital cafeteria coffee and uncomfortable waiting room chairs. While my parents took shifts at Allison's bedside, I noticed James' visits growing shorter each time. He had work calls and wedding cancellation details to handle. I watched my father growing increasingly grim as he observed his future son-in-law's waning commitment. When the doctors began reducing Allison's sedation to assess her neurological function, I was the one who volunteered to research spinal specialists and rehabilitation options. I compiled information, made calls, and created a document outlining the best treatment paths, while my mother sat paralyzed by the uncertainty, and my father handled the practical matters of insurance and medical bills. On the 3rd day, when Allison finally regained consciousness enough to understand her situation, I stepped up to help manage the medical decisions that my emotionally overwhelmed parents struggled with. The family dynamic that had excluded me from the wedding now shifted by necessity, my organized approach to crisis and emotional stability suddenly valuable in ways my family had never appreciated before. After a week of hospital vigils, I contacted my editor in New York and arranged an extended leave of absence. What had begun as an emergency trip was transforming into something more permanent. I cleared out my bedroom at my parents' house, which had remained largely unchanged since high school, a time capsule of the person I used to be, complete with photography contest ribbons and faded posters. While my mother oscillated between tearful despair and iron control, I established a routine. Mornings were spent researching specialists and treatment options. I created a spreadsheet of rehabilitation centers, weighing their success rates against proximity and insurance coverage. Afternoons and evenings were devoted to hospital visits, where I'd bring fresh flowers, read aloud from Allison's favorite books, or simply sit beside her. "You don't have to do all this," my father said one evening as we walked to the parking garage together. "Your mother and I can handle it." "I know you can," I replied. "But I want to help." A week after the accident, a neurologist confirmed what we'd feared. Allison had partial paralysis affecting her lower limbs. There was hope for some recovery with intensive rehabilitation, but the prognosis remained uncertain. I was the one who stayed overnight at the hospital when Allison first received this news, witnessing her shattered expression as the doctor explained what her future might look like. My parents had gone home exhausted, and James had a work commitment he couldn't reschedule. "I'll never walk again," Allison whispered after the doctor left, her voice hoarse from the recently removed breathing tube. "That's not what he said," I corrected gently, moving to sit on the edge of her bed. "He said you might regain some function with therapy. There are amazing advancements in this field every day." "My wedding," she began, tears filling her eyes. "Will happen when you're ready," I finished. "James can wait." Something flickered across her face at the mention of her fiancé, doubt, perhaps, or recognition of something she wasn't ready to articulate. As days turned into weeks, I established myself as Allison's primary advocate. I attended every medical consultation, taking detailed notes and asking questions that never occurred to my shell-shocked parents. I coordinated with insurance, investigated experimental treatments, and joined online support groups for families of spinal injury patients. James' visits grew increasingly sporadic, always accompanied by lavish flower arrangements that seemed more like apologies for his absence than genuine expressions of support. He appeared uncomfortable with the medical realities, averting his eyes from Allison's catheter bag, or the compression stockings that prevented blood clots in her immobilized legs. "He hasn't touched me since the accident," Allison confided 3 weeks after her injury, when we were alone during a late-night hospital stay. "Not really. Not beyond holding my hand for a few minutes." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to defend him. Crisis reveals character, but also challenges people in unexpected ways. A larger part recognized the red flags that had been multiplying since the accident. My mother maintained her resentment toward my presence despite, or perhaps because of, my increasing role in Allison's care. It came to a head in the hospital cafeteria one morning as we both sought coffee, during a shift change that had temporarily removed us from Allison's room. "I don't understand why you're still here," she said, stirring artificial sweetener into her cup with sharp, angry movements. "Allison needs support. She has us. She has James." I laughed without humor. "Does she have James?" "Because from where I'm standing, he's already got one foot out the door." "That's a terrible thing to say," she hissed, though I caught the flash of fear in her eyes that suggested she'd harbored similar thoughts. "Maybe," I conceded. "But I'm not the one who's terrible for saying it. He's terrible for doing it." "You've always been jealous of your sister's happiness." The accusation was so wildly disconnected from the reality of the past weeks that I could only stare at her in disbelief. "Jealous? I put my entire life on hold to be here for her. I'm sleeping on a pull-out chair most nights while James is at home in his comfortable bed. How exactly does that translate to jealousy? You're enjoying this, she said, her voice low. Being the hero while James struggles. Nobody is enjoying any of this, I replied, keeping my voice level with effort. Least of all Allison. But unlike some people, I'm not going to abandon her because things got difficult. My father, witnessing this exchange as he approached with his own coffee, finally intervened. Diana, that's enough. Sophia has been invaluable these past weeks. It was the first time I could remember him explicitly taking my side against my mother in possibly ever. The shock of it momentarily silenced us both. The real breakthrough came a few days later when Allison was having a particularly difficult morning. The physical therapist had pushed her hard, and the reality of her lengthy recovery process had hit home. My parents had gone to meet with an insurance representative, and I was sitting with her, simply providing quiet company. Sophia, she said suddenly, her voice small. Yeah. Will you stay? Not just now, but through this. I don't think I can do this without you. I looked at my sister, my perfect, golden child sister, who had been the standard against which my every failure was measured, and saw only vulnerability and fear. I'm not going anywhere, Allie. I promise. That evening, when my mother tried to suggest I might want to get back to my life in New York, Allison spoke up for the first time. I need her here, Mom. Sophia stays. The 6-week mark after the accident brought another seismic shift in our family dynamic. James arrived at the rehabilitation center where Allison had been transferred, his expression grave as he asked for a private conversation. I was in the hallway when he emerged 30 minutes later, his face a mask of practiced sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. He nodded stiffly in my direction before leaving. When I entered Allison's room, I found her staring out the window, tears streaming silently down her face. He's gone, isn't he? I asked, though I already knew. She nodded. He said he isn't equipped for this kind of challenge. That he needs to be honest about his limitations. A bitter laugh escaped her. Apparently, in sickness and in health was just too much to ask. I sat beside her, taking her hand. I'm so sorry, Allie. The funny thing is, she said after a moment, I think I'm more relieved than heartbroken. What does that say about our relationship? It says you deserve better, I replied simply. That night, as I helped Allison prepare for sleep, adjusting pillows that supported her body in the ways her damaged muscles couldn't, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know what's ironic, she said. You weren't invited to my wedding because they thought you'd make things awkward. Now there's no wedding, and you're the only one who doesn't make me feel awkward about who I am now. It was the first time either of us had explicitly mentioned the wedding invitation situation since the accident. The acknowledgement hung between us, not quite an apology, but a recognition of how thoroughly our roles had reversed. Well, I said finally, their loss is my gain. Now I get to spend quality time with my sister, instead of making small talk with Dad's business associates over rubber chicken. Her surprised laughter, the first I'd heard since the accident, felt like the beginning of something new between us. 3 months after the accident, our lives had fallen into a new rhythm centered around Allison's recovery. I had sublet my New York apartment to a friend, moved my essential camera gear to my parents' house, and set up a makeshift office in the corner of my childhood bedroom. I managed to keep my photography business minimally alive, by taking occasional local assignments and editing remotely. Allison had been discharged from the rehabilitation center to continue her recovery at home. The formal dining room my mother had once reserved for holiday dinners and dinner parties had been transformed into a temporary bedroom to avoid the stairs. Physical therapy equipment cluttered the once pristine space, exercise balls, resistance bands, and a specialized wheelchair that allowed Allison more independence. Each morning began with me helping Allison through her range of motion exercises before her home physical therapist arrived. I'd learned to be both gentle and firm, pushing her when she needed motivation, and knowing when to back off when pain or frustration overwhelmed her. "I can't do this anymore," she said one particularly difficult morning, tears of frustration streaming down her face after failing repeatedly to transfer herself from bed to wheelchair without assistance. "Yes, you can," I insisted, not unkindly. "One more try, and if you still can't do it, we take a break and try again this afternoon." "Why are you so stubborn?" she demanded. "Learned it from my little sister," I replied, earning a reluctant smile. The physical therapist had praised my approach, noting that families often fell into one of two extremes, either babying the patient out of pity, or pushing too hard out of desperation for recovery. My balance of compassion and challenge seemed to strike the right note for Allison's progress. Small victories became causes for celebration. The first time Allison managed a full rotation on the stationary hand cycle, the day she successfully dressed herself without assistance, the afternoon she propelled her wheelchair the entire length of the driveway and back without resting. "I never realized how strong you are," she told me one evening as I helped her with her evening stretching routine. "Not just physically, but inside." "I've always been strong," I replied. No one in this family ever noticed, because they were too busy looking at what they thought were my weaknesses. The forced proximity of our situation created space for conversations that had been avoided for years. Late nights after our parents had gone to bed became opportunities for long overdue honesty. "I used to hate how easily you walked away from everything," Allison confessed one night, as we shared contraband ice cream in her makeshift bedroom. "College, career path, even family, you just chose what you wanted regardless of expectations." I envied that freedom. "Freedom?" I echoed in surprise. "I always thought you had everything you wanted. The perfect life, mom and dad's approval, the dream career." "I had what everyone else wanted for me," she corrected. "Do you know I originally wanted to study marine biology? Dad talked me out of it because there's no future in that. So I got a sensible business degree, and a sensible job, and a sensible fiancé, and look where all that sensibility got me." "A broken spine wasn't part of anyone's sensible plan," I pointed out. "No, but maybe it saved me from a broken life," she replied quietly. I was about to marry a man who couldn't handle the first real challenge we faced. What would have happened at the second? Or the 10th? These midnight conversations gradually rebuilt the connection we'd lost years ago, creating something new and stronger in its place. We reminisced about childhood memories, confessed teenage secrets, and slowly navigated toward the more painful topics that had divided us. "Did you know Mom actively encouraged me not to invite you to the wedding?" Allison revealed about 4 months into her recovery, during one of our late-night talks. "I figured as much," I said, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "She called to tell me I wasn't invited. She told me you'd understand, that you probably wouldn't want to come anyway since you were so busy in New York." Allison looked ashamed. "I should have called you myself, but it was easier to believe her than to face what I was doing to my own sister." "Why did you go along with it?" I asked the question that had haunted me. Allison was quiet for a long moment. I think part of me was afraid." "Of me?" "Of what you represent. Freedom. Authenticity. All the things I wasn't brave enough to choose." She reached for my hand. "And maybe I was afraid that having you there would make it obvious to everyone, especially me, that I was making the safe choice, not the right one." My father, too, was evolving. As the weeks passed, I noticed him observing my interactions with Allison, my methodical approach to her care, my unwavering commitment despite our complicated history. One evening as I sat on the porch editing photos while Allison napped, he joined me with 2 cups of coffee. "I never gave you enough credit," he said without preamble. I looked up in surprise. "For what?" "For knowing your own mind. For having the courage to follow your path even when it wasn't the one we laid out for you." He stared into his coffee. "I always thought Allison was the strong one, because she did everything right. But there's different kinds of strength, isn't there?" The acknowledgement, years overdue but still meaningful, created a small crack in the wall I'd built around my heart where my father was concerned. 5 months post-accident brought a milestone that electrified our household. Allison moved her toes voluntarily during a physical therapy session. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but it signified that some nerve pathways were regenerating. "This is very promising," her neurologist confirmed during a follow-up appointment. "It suggests there's incomplete damage to the spinal cord, which means further recovery is possible with continued therapy." From that moment, Allison attacked her rehabilitation with renewed determination. The toe movement was followed by ankle flexion, then minimal knee control. Each new capability, however small, represented a victory against the initial devastating prognosis. With these physical improvements came a parallel emotional healing within our family. My mother, who had maintained her distance and disapproval of my involvement despite its obvious benefits, began to show small signs of change. She started asking my opinion on Allison's care, acknowledging my research into experimental treatments, even occasionally expressing gratitude for my presence. The most dramatic breakthrough came 6 months after the accident. After weeks of practice with parallel bars, Allison took her first steps with a walker. My parents and I stood watching, tears streaming down our faces, as she painstakingly moved 1 foot forward, then the other. "Look at me," she said, face flushed with effort and triumph. "I'm walking." The victory was both physical and symbolic, a testament to her determination and a rebirth of sorts. The Allison who stood shakily between those parallel bars wasn't the same woman who had planned an elaborate society wedding with a man who abandoned her when things got difficult. This Allison had been forged through pain into something stronger, more authentic, more like me. That evening, as we gathered for dinner, a rare occasion when Allison felt strong enough to join us at the actual dining table, the atmosphere was lighter than it had been in months. The milestone had lifted all our spirits, creating a momentary respite from the grinding routine of recovery. It was in this moment of celebration that my mother, in typical fashion, managed to say exactly the wrong thing. "I suppose there's a silver lining to all this," she remarked, passing the salad. "At least you didn't go through with the wedding only to have James leave you later." The table fell silent. My father froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. I watched Allison's expression shift from shock to something harder. "A silver lining," she repeated slowly. "To my spinal cord injury and my fiancé abandoning me." My mother, realizing too late the inappropriateness of her comment, backpedaled. "I just meant that it revealed his true character before you made a legal commitment." "No," Allison said, her voice gaining strength. "You meant that my broken engagement matters more to you than my broken body. Just like my perfect wedding mattered more than having my sister there." It was the first time she had directly confronted our mother about anything, let alone something so central to the family dynamic. I watched with a mixture of pride and apprehension as years of accumulated resentment and obedience began to crack. The conversation that followed would become the catalyst for the final phase of our family's transformation, one that would either heal us completely or fracture us beyond repair. 6 months post-accident, our family gathered around the dining table for what had become a weekly tradition, Sunday dinner together, with Allison now able to join us at the table using her walker and a specialized chair. The physical milestones of her recovery were evident in her improved mobility, but the emotional recovery of our family remained a work in progress. The tension from the previous week's silver lining comment still lingered in the air as my mother served her signature pot roast, making carefully neutral conversation about neighborhood gossip and distant relatives. "Mrs. Henderson stopped by with a casserole yesterday," she said, passing the carrots to my father. "She asked about the wedding gifts, whether they'd all been returned yet." Allison stiffened beside me. "I haven't had time to deal with wedding gifts, Mom. I've been a little busy learning to walk again." "I'm just passing along the question, dear," my mother replied. "People are curious, that's all. It was going to be such a beautiful wedding." "Maybe we could change the subject," my father suggested, sensing the brewing storm. "Why?" Allison challenged, surprising us all. "Let's talk about the wedding that never happened. Let's talk about how the only person who's been consistently here for me wasn't even invited to it." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother set down her fork with deliberate precision. "Allison, this isn't the time." "When is the time, Mom?" Allison interrupted. "After I'm fixed and we can all go back to pretending we're the perfect family. After Sophia goes back to New York, and we can continue excluding her." I placed a hand on Allison's arm, not to stop her but to offer support. "Allie, you don't have to do this now." She covered my hand with hers. "Yes, I do. I've been lying in that bed for months with nothing but time to think about how we got here." My mother's face had taken on the rigid expression she used when emotions threatened to break through her carefully maintained facade. "I don't see what your accident has to do with Sophia's invitation situation." "Of course you don't," Allison said with surprising calm. "Because you've spent years making sure we stayed in our assigned roles. Allison the perfect daughter, Sophia the problem child. It worked so well we stopped seeing each other as sisters." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "I've always loved both my daughters equally." "Equally doesn't mean the same," I found myself saying. "You've always had conditions on your love for me." "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "I've only ever wanted what's best for both of you." "What you thought was best," Allison corrected. "What fit your image of the perfect family." "Well, look at us now, Mom. Look at your perfect daughter with her walker and her physical therapy equipment. Look at your disappointing daughter, who dropped everything to take care of me when my perfect fiancé couldn't handle it." My mother's eyes filled with tears, whether from anger or pain it was hard to tell. "I don't deserve this. Not after everything I've done for this family." "She was always there," Allison continued as if my mother hadn't spoken, her voice gaining strength. "Even when we pushed her away. Even when I let you convince me not to invite my own sister to my wedding, because she might make things awkward. Do you know what's really awkward, Mom? Realizing the sister you rejected is the only person who didn't reject you when things got hard." My father, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "Allison's right, Diana. We've done Sophia a disservice for years." My mother turned to him, betrayal written across her face. "You're taking their side." "This isn't about sides," he said quietly. "It's about truth. I've watched Sophia these past months, her dedication, her strength, her unwavering support despite how we've treated her. I've had to ask myself some hard questions about the family dynamic we've created." I felt a lump forming in my throat at my father's unexpected defense. "Do you know how deeply it hurt me to be excluded from Allison's wedding?" I asked my mother, finally giving voice to the pain I'd carried. Not because I cared about the event itself, but because it confirmed what I've always suspected, that I'm only part of this family when I conform to your expectations. "That's not true," my mother insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "It is true," Allison said. "I knew it was wrong when I agreed to it, but it was easier to go along with what you wanted than to stand up for my sister. I've had a lot of time to think about regrets, Mom, and that's near the top of my list. My mother's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was just trying to protect the day for you, to make sure everything was perfect. Perfect for whom? Allison challenged. For me. Or for your image of what my life should be. I only wanted what was best. Stop saying that. The force of Allison's interruption startled all of us. That's always your excuse. But you don't get to decide what's best for us anymore. You don't get to decide who belongs in our lives and who doesn't. My father reached across the table to take my mother's hand. Diana, listen to them. Really listen. My mother looked from my father to Allison to me, her defenses visibly crumbling. For perhaps the first time in my memory, she seemed to be actually hearing us rather than formulating her next rebuttal. I never meant to hurt anyone, she said finally, her voice small. Especially not my daughters. Intentions don't erase impact, I said gently. And the impact has been years of feeling like the family disappointment, of never being good enough no matter what I achieved. And years of feeling trapped by impossible standards, Allison added. Of making choices based on your approval rather than my happiness. My mother was silent for a long moment, absorbing our words. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its defensive edge. I think I've been so focused on creating the perfect family that I couldn't see the damage I was doing to the family I actually have. She wiped at her tears. My own mother was the same way with me. Nothing I did was ever good enough, especially compared to Patricia. The mention of my aunt, her sister, added a new dimension to the conversation, illuminating patterns that had been repeated across generations. I swore I wouldn't be like her, my mother continued. But instead of rejecting all children equally like she did, I put all my expectations on Allison and all my disapproval on Sophia. She looked at me directly. I see now how unfair that was. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the most honest acknowledgement she had ever offered. We can't change the past, my father said, but we can change how we move forward. All of us. He looked at me. Starting with a proper thank you to Sophia for everything she's done these past months. My mother nodded, tears still streaming. I don't know if you can forgive me, Sophia. Either of you. But I want to try to do better. I think forgiveness is a process, I said carefully. Just like Allison's recovery. It happens in small steps, over time, with effort on all sides. Maybe we should consider family therapy, my father suggested. Get some professional help to work through these patterns. To my surprise, my mother nodded agreement. I think that would be wise. As the conversation continued into the evening, something fundamental shifted in our family dynamic. The carefully maintained facades had cracked open, allowing painful truths to emerge, but also creating space for something more authentic to develop. Later that week, Allison asked me to help her look through the wedding plans that had been abandoned after her accident. We sat together in her room, flipping through sample books and vendor contracts that now seemed like artifacts from another life. It's strange, she said, running her fingers over the embossed invitation sample. I was so focused on this perfect day, but now I can't remember why it seemed so important. Weddings are designed to feel important, I offered. The whole industry is built around it. It wasn't just the wedding though, she said thoughtfully. It was the whole perfect life narrative. College, career, marriage, kids, all following the approved timeline. She set aside the sample book. I don't think I want that anymore. At least, not in the same way. What do you want? She considered the question with the seriousness of someone who had never really asked it of herself before. I want to live more authentically. Like you do. She smiled. Maybe with fewer tattoos. The tattoos are optional, I assured her with a laugh. I think when I'm stronger, I want to go back to school. Marine biology was always the dream I abandoned. It's never too late, I told her, feeling a surge of pride at my sister's emerging independence. And for what it's worth, I think you'd make an amazing marine biologist. As we continued sorting through the wedding materials, deciding what to discard and what to save, I realized we were doing the same with our family relationships, keeping what was valuable, discarding what was harmful, and building something new from what remained. 1 year after the accident that had rewritten our family story, we gathered for another dinner, this one a celebration rather than a confrontation. The dining room, that had temporarily served as Alison's recovery space, had been restored to its original purpose, though with fewer formal touches than my mother had once insisted upon. Alison entered without assistance, walking slowly but steadily with just a cane. Her recovery had exceeded medical expectations, though she would likely always have some mobility limitations. More remarkable than her physical progress was her transformation from the inside out. Look what the mail brought today, she announced, holding up an acceptance letter. I start classes at the Marine Science Institute next semester. Cheers erupted around the table. My mother, who once would have questioned such a career change, was the first to stand and embrace her. I'm so proud of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. My father raised his glass. To new beginnings. After the accident, I had initially planned to return to New York once Alison's condition stabilized. Instead, I found myself creating a different arrangement, splitting my time between New York and my hometown, maintaining my photography business while strengthening the family connections that had been so painstakingly rebuilt. In the months since our confrontation dinner, we had all committed to the family therapy my father suggested. Weekly sessions had uncovered generations of patterns, from my grandmother's rigid perfectionism that had shaped my mother to the competition between sisters that had been unconsciously reproduced in Alison and me. The work wasn't easy. There were sessions filled with tears, old hurts reopened before they could properly heal, moments when progress seemed impossible. But gradually, we learned new ways to communicate, to express needs without judgment, to love without conditions. My mother's evolution had perhaps been the most surprising. The woman who had once cared so deeply about appearances now volunteered at the rehabilitation center where Alison had recovered, offering support to families navigating similar crises. She had even begun reconciling with her own sister Patricia, recognizing patterns of favoritism in their childhood that mirrored what she had perpetuated with her daughters. I wish I could have seen it without the crisis, she admitted during one family session. But sometimes it takes something drastic to break through decades of conditioning. Alison and I had developed a creative project together, a photography series documenting her recovery journey alongside interviews with other spinal injury survivors. The project had attracted attention from disability advocacy organizations and would be exhibited at a local gallery the following month. For the first time, our different strengths complemented rather than competed with each other. My artistic vision combined with Alison's organizational skills and newfound passion for advocacy created something neither of us could have achieved alone. As for James, he had faded from our lives with surprising speed. He had sent Alison a formal letter 6 months after breaking their engagement, expressing regret for his inability to rise to the occasion and hoping she was finding her path to recovery. The corporate language revealed how little he had ever truly known her. Alison was dating again, casually, thoughtfully, a marine biology teaching assistant who valued her journey rather than despite it. The way he looked at her, with admiration for her strength rather than pity for her limitations, told me all I needed to know about his character. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the accident hadn't occurred? I asked Alison as we sat on the back porch after dinner, watching fireflies illuminate the summer evening. She considered the question carefully. Sometimes. I might be married to the wrong man. You and I might still be estranged. Mom might still be trying to control everything. Dad might still be going along with it. She gestured to her cane. I'd give anything not to have physical pain for the rest of my life, but the emotional healing. I wouldn't trade that for anything. Inside, we could hear our parents laughing together, a sound that had been rare in our childhood home where perfection had always taken precedence over joy. Crisis has a way of revealing what matters, I said. And who matters? I'm sorry it took something so dramatic for me to see the truth, Allison said, reaching for my hand. About the family, about myself, about you. Better late than never, I replied, squeezing her hand in return. Thank you for coming when Dad called that night. Even after what we did with the wedding. You're my sister, I said simply. That's what matters. As we watched the sky darken and stars emerge, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. A year ago, I had been the unwanted sister, excluded from a wedding that would never happen. Now, I was an integral part of a family that had been broken open and reformed into something stronger, more authentic, more compassionate. The accident had been devastating, the recovery arduous, but through it all, we had discovered what family truly meant, not the perfect image my mother had once curated, but the messy, complicated, deeply loving reality we had created together through crisis and healing. Sometimes not being invited to the wedding means being present for something far more important, the moments that truly define a family. The celebrations matter less than the crises weathered together, the picture-perfect occasions less than the imperfect reality of showing up when it counts. I looked at my sister, so different from the woman she had been a year ago. Stronger in ways that couldn't be photographed, beautiful in her authenticity rather than her perfection. I thought of my parents, finding their way to a more honest relationship with each other and their daughters. I thought of myself, no longer the family outcast, but a valued member of this imperfect, evolving unit. Have you ever experienced a family transformation after a crisis? How did it change your relationships? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life journeys of healing and growth. Remember that sometimes our greatest challenges lead to our most profound connections. Thank you for being part of this community, and allowing me to share my story with you. May your own family journeys, whatever form they take, lead you to authentic love and acceptance.